All right, well, I guess we'll get started. So this is fast bulletproof builds. If this is not what you're looking for, you might want to leave. Feel free. But in any case, we're here to talk about a problem we were having at Eventbrite, mainly trying to get continuous integration to happen with NPM and Grunt. And what that means is when I build, it should always happen and it shouldn't fail. And when I run Grunt, it should run quickly in dev environments. This doesn't always happen, and it took some tricks. So first off, we'll talk about what Grunt is and what NPM are, what the problems and solutions for each one are. So who am I? My name is Parris. I work at Eventbrite. I'm a front-end software engineer. And I work a lot on some of the crazy UIs. We have a new product called Seat Designer, which kind of does Photoshop-like things inside of a web browser. So we drag and drop things, and we can kind of design seat maps and things like that. I worked on that, and I also, by proxy, had to also handle some build system-related things. So what are NPM and Grunt? Well, NPM is a package manager, put quite simply. It helps you, it's mostly for front end. Actually, it's not mostly for front end, but we can use it for front end. People use Bower for front end as well, but I chose, and a bunch of us chose to use NPM for both, so we don't have like 3 package managers, and that was kind of a pain. The other one, and so what's Grunt? Grunt's a task manager. It's not totally a build system, but people use it as a build system, and it's been pretty useful as such for us. So a simple use case and an example of NPM might be that you have a bunch of packages, you're going to install them, NPM goes ahead and installs them for you, and that's that. And for Grunt, you want to say, hey, I want to clean my folders, I want to run Compass, which compiles my Sass stuff, into CSS, I want to pre-compile handlebars templates, I want to create a style guide, I want to release a version of some package, I want to build some sub-dependencies. So we have all these sorts of tasks in our pipeline, and a lot of other people will as well. So what's the problem with NPM right now? This is basically what all our brains looked like when we were relying on the internet for builds. Every day, we would have some sort of crazy build failure that would occur. We'd comb through the logs and try to figure out, wait, did someone install something new? Did something weird happen? And what actually happened was NPM was down, which is not so great, but other things also go down. GitHub goes down, Bower goes down, and you don't really want to rely on all that stuff while you're trying to release something really important to production. So CI is great as long as everything is online, and otherwise your head's exploding and you're miserable. So, and let's talk about NPM in specific. So this was a graph for March. If you notice, this is a graph of outages in March. This is about 12 pages long, and all in all, it resulted in about a 93% uptime, which doesn't sound so bad, but if you think about it, it's like hours per month. So if you have some really crucial fix you need to get out, or you want to or you have some sort of press release that's going to go out the next day and you can't build because NPM's down, well, that basically means super irritable back-end devs yelling at you, really angry ops team wondering what's happening, and the front-end devs kind of sweating and crying in the corner. So how does NPM install dependencies? It's a little bit different than, say, pip or some other package managers you might be more used to. The way it installs it is it takes your top-level things, installs them at the top level, and when you install something, when your dependencies have a dependency, it places them inside of those folders. So you have this tree of dependencies. This is great in that you can be sure that your package only has the dependencies it needs and not other dependencies. and versioning is correct. It's bad when file sizes are like 200 megabytes when they shouldn't. They should probably not be. Your dependencies shouldn't be 200 megabytes worth of stuff. Well, so we came up with a few solutions. The easiest one, which we didn't go down, but we might in the future as an optimization, is just to zip up all these. So you install once, you zip up all your node modules inside of one zip file, and you put that somewhere, and people install from there. This is great, but not everyone on your team is going to know how to do it, and you need some service, and you need to plan it out and kind of figure this out. It actually required some architecture and has corner cases, so we decided not to go down that path, but we might eventually. The other big one we thought of was, well, the NPM registry is great. The only thing is, I don't want to have to. I don't want to be subject to its downtimes and irregularities. So what we ended up doing was throwing an nginx proxy cache in front of it. So you hit the cache, and you end up just pulling from the npm registry if the package is not already cached. Another thing we thought of now that we have a more global team is possibly throwing Fastly in front of it and having a CDN. So we would hit the CDN first and then go to npm, which is actually, we might actually go down that route too. Part 2 of this was using kappa made by PayPal. So what we can do is, in case any downtime does occur, we can fall back to a second mirror. This is pretty useful as well. We can, this means that even if you didn't want to go down the proxy cache solution, you can specify like the 3 or 4 mirrors that exist for npm out there or whatever. And if the npm registry is down, you fall back to the next one and the next one. This also lets you get away with some pretty cool tricks, like having your own private registry. So another problem with this entire solution is you want to have your own packages, and you want a build system to build your dependencies, but you can't quite do that with npm, so you have to like add GitHub-based dependencies and things like that. What that eventually does is slow down your entire build process, because npm doesn't really have a good solution for GitHub-based dependencies. It'll hit GitHub, download your package JSON file and everything inside of it, and then every time like download all the dependencies for it. And this eventually causes a problem, which is why we need something like Reggie. We used Reggie. It was like the only thing around at the time. Since I wrote this talk, it's actually been deprecated, which is great. But there's other solutions out there. In fact, in the past 2 months, because this is such a reoccurring problem, there's about 5 to 10 new things that have popped up, including Sinopia, which actually does both of the previous things that we talked about. So it does the proxy caching, and it does the npm private registry. So you can npm install this thing, npm start it, and then just point all your dev boxes to it, and you'll pretty much be set. I don't know all the caveats there, so proceed with warning, I guess. Another big one is there seem to be all sorts of SaaS-based solutions for the same thing. So I found Gem Fury, which is part of Heroku, so you can push your private packages to it. And I think it also handles the proxy caching kind of stuff, but you guys will need to look into that more. So NPM does a lot of things for you. It's not just an install tool. It doesn't just install all your packages. It also does things like let you freeze those packages up, kind of like pip freeze, but there's some caveats there as well. You'll never get the same shrink wrap file twice. It does some crazy things, but for all intents and purposes, npm shrink wrap is pretty much like a pip freeze, if that makes sense to anyone. There's also npm link, which lets you develop your private packages while you're so you can say, hey, I have package A. It's all my style guide stuff. It has all the styling for my website. It contains a bunch of widgets. But I also have my main website. So you can say, hey, link these two things together. Don't make me upload a bunch of stuff and then like pull it down on the other side. So we use that pretty often in active development. npm dedupe will shrink down that 200 megabyte node modules folder into like 88 megs. And if you're trying to distribute a tarball around, you'll probably need that. And finally, never add GitHub dependencies. What we've seen is every time you add a GitHub dependency, you'll end up needing to download that GitHub dependency over and over and over again. So the private registry route is like totally the way to go. There is some rumor around NPM actually trying to support its own private registry kind of system. I'm not quite sure about all the details, but messages have been going back and forth about that. So what's wrong with Grunt? This is an entirely separate set of issues, but essentially what we need from a build system is something that runs scripts. Moreover, it runs scripts quickly, and we need it to be able to build our dependencies. So if I have a folder with a bunch of SAS files, it should build when I build my main repo. And the other thing is people complain about ugly syntax of Grunt, but there's ways to clean that up as well. So the first big one was building dependencies. So if I'm trying to build a bunch of SAS files and make that thing distributable, well, you can't really like run Grunt inside of node modules. And that's pretty much because of the reason we described earlier, which is when you install a package, what happens is you install your dependencies, their dependencies install their dependencies, but if they share dependencies across two different packages, they'll pull that dependency up. So as soon as you try to run Grunt inside of one of your node module folders, it just breaks because it can't find stuff. So there's a few solutions there. And finally, the build system is just slow as hell. After a while, you'll just realize that I need to run Compass every time. I need to run require.js every time. I need to run handlebars every time. But you don't really need to. Like, there are ways around it. And Make kind of provides something out of the box for it. But with Grunt, you have to install some plugins and kind of figure that out. So this is what our Gruntfile looks like. It's a lot more lean than the base example. The base example lists out every task kind of listed sequentially inside of your Gruntfile. That ends up being not so sustainable in the long run. What that means is you have about 20 JSON blobs for each task you might want, and having that all live inside of a Gruntfile is not so great. So the solution is actually built right into Grunt, but it's not well advertised. The first thing is Grunt load tasks, which lets you specify a folder and load up all the tasks that are within that folder. And the second thing is this plugin called load grunt tasks. It's made by that Cinderhouse guy, the guy who made Bower, and he's a big contributor in the community. Essentially, it pulls in all of the everything in node modules that is prefixed with Grunt, which basically every Grunt plugin is. So Grunt load tasks is kind of a big deal, because before this, you'd either have one giant Grunt file, or you'd have to require each Grunt file. It also allows us to load up our dependencies tasks. So this Compass package, or this style guide package, has a bunch of tasks. Let's go load that up and run those tasks at our top level. So yeah, like I said, load tasks isn't super well advertised, but you can, but there's some blog posts out there that describe it, and it's a pretty popular solution nowadays. And so what do you do inside of these task files? What you actually have to do is, it's essentially the same thing, but you're just splitting everything up into their own files and making things a lot cleaner. So here I'm setting grunt config set, Compass. My individual Compass task name is Eventbrite core, and I pass in a bunch of options and it runs. You can take this further and require some dependencies task files and then pass in alternate options to them. So the way we've kind of specified how you create a task file is the first argument is grunt, the second argument is a bunch of options, and it merges those options in. So here we're requiring this thing called reserved seating. We're taking its we're taking some task it has, we're overriding a bunch of directory information so it works with our core module, and then it just runs whenever we run the normal build. And so moving off of that, we had a big issue with speed because at some point, all of these tasks to run took maybe 1 to 2 minutes every time you ran it, which doesn't sound too bad, but then you're trying to do development. And so every time you're like, oh, I need to go run this thing every 5 minutes, it becomes a little overwhelming and you end up getting almost nothing done. So Grunt Newer is a plugin on top of Grunt, and it lets you specify inputs and outputs. So so you don't need to do this with Compass, but you might need to do it with like handlebars or any pre-compilation steps you have. So you say, hey, these are my input files and these are my outputs. It works with most plugins right off the bat, but not all of them. But you can still shove things into files. A great example of kind of making this work for something that it wasn't designed for is require.js. So when require.js's optimization step happens, it crawls through your dependency graph. And that doesn't really provide you a means to say what your inputs and outputs are. But what you can do is generate a source map. You read the source map in, that's your inputs, and then your outputs are still the same files. And yeah. And finally, there was also Grunt Clean, which was kind of missing, and you have to develop that at some point. Caching doesn't always work out the right way, and you want to kind of sweep all that stuff away and kind of start from scratch. So a few links. I wanted to keep this short. Like, we should all be like developing software, not talking about build systems all day. But a few links. So Sinopia, I'm recommending that as the go-to thing nowadays. I've been hearing a lot of good things about it. It lets you, once again, have your own private modules and have the nginx proxy caching kind of thing. So if you're not reliant on the npm registry anymore. If you want to see a pretty clean example of how to build a grunt file, you can go to that GitHub URL there. This library I wrote is pretty tiny, and it does a few really simple things. I also wrote a blog post on the Eventbrite website, and so if you want to hear more about like what we did with Grunt, you can check that out. And finally, I don't know. I'm gonna stand on my soapbox for like half a second, but basically, we don't need like 50 more like package managers and 50 more build systems. We really just need to, step up our game on the things we have, and we should be solving the hard problems of like caching and how to make this stuff super redundant and like all that stuff. So yeah, that's about it. Any questions? Oh.
So why did you choose Grunt as opposed to just using Make or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been having this argument lately, back and forth around the company, like why aren't we using Make? And the honest truth about it is I don't think Make is super accessible for almost anyone, and it ends up being the case that you need to be like a really awesome Unix hacker or like kind of, really understand Make to get anything really amazing to happen with it. But Grunt has like a much lower barrier to entry, and oftentimes our front-end devs are actually the ones modifying Grunt, not like our ops team or like some Unix hacker. So it kind of made sense to use Grunt. In fact, we had Make in the company at one point, I believe. It was replaced by Scones, which is like a pip version of Make. And then that kind of didn't work out for everyone, and it was pretty slow. And then now it's finally like Grunt, and now everyone's like, hey, let's go back to Make. And I think that'll just probably never end. Anyone else? Cool, thanks.